Using Flash is one of the best ways to level up your photography. It unlocks so many different looks and vibes. It lets you shoot in the dark and freeze time and more, but Flash photography can be quite tricky and weird to wrap your head around. You have to rejig your knowledge about exposure, and a lot of the time there are so many settings that it can feel a bit more like you're trying to hack the Matrix than just make art. Plus, to make matters worse, there are so many different flavors of flash and camera combinations that it can be borderline impossible to find a tutorial for your specific kit. So that's why in this video, I'm going to help you understand the underlying fundamentals of Flash so that you can copy and paste that knowledge onto any gear you have. But I'll also show you how to get great results out of a few setups that I tend to see pretty frequently. Before we get our hands dirty and our AA batteries out, why would you want to shoot Flash in the first place? It sounds like a silly question, but you'll be shocked at how many different looks shooting with a flash can give you. Sure, you can do the standard studio portrait thing, but you can also do in-your-face 1998 style direct flash. Or you can use a really bright flash in broad daylight to get a super surreal, spacey look. Or you could just bash the light off the ceiling to brighten up the image when you're shooting indoors at a dark party, for example. Or you could use balanced fill flash so that you can freeze motion or freeze motion close to you but not further away. I'll show you how to get some of those looks in this video. Point is, there's not just one look that you can achieve with Flash, and so learning to use it gives you so many more ways to approach a particular scene, which gives you more creative power. Here's the tricky thing about wrapping your brain around Flash. When you're adding light to the scene, you're changing the rules around a bit. You need to use your shutter speed, ISO, and aperture in a slightly different way. We'll talk about TTL flash a bit later, but for now, we're going to focus on manual flash since that might be what you have available, but I also think it's the easiest way to learn what's going on here. One of the easiest ways to learn anything new is on Skillshare, the sponsor of today's video. For example, I've been trying to learn how to draw. I'm definitely a better photographer, at least for now, but I've been improving quite a lot. That's thanks to the Always Drawing class on Skillshare, where the goal is to keep a daily sketchbook. Skillshare is a massive online community for creatives, and they have thousands of classes led by industry experts. I really think it's one of the best places to level up your skills or to learn something completely new. It's not just drawing. You could take a class on color grading or Photoshop or pottery. Anything you can think of, you can learn it on Skillshare. And with New Year's right around the corner, now is a great time to get a head start on those New Year's resolutions, or very quickly catch up on last year's resolutions that got swept under the rug a little bit. The best part, the first 500 people to use the link in the video description will get a free 1-month trial of Skillshare, so get started today. Thank you Skillshare for sponsoring this video, and thank you for watching. So let's start with the obvious one. How do we control how bright the flash is? Some flashes let you decide how bright they are. Most of the time this is expressed as a fraction. So here I've got my flash set to 1/4, which is 1/4 of its full power. Other flashes, especially older film era flashes for film cameras, sometimes only have one fixed brightness. But don't worry, we will get to that. Here's the trick. If we need more light, you can turn the flash up, or you can open up your aperture by going from f5.6 to f4, for example. But you're saying, when I slow the shutter speed down, it doesn't really do anything. What gives? Flash isn't just called flash because it's bright. It's also fast. Most of the time, flashes go off faster than even the fastest shutter speed of your camera. So most of the time, that makes the shutter speed you're set to kind of irrelevant. You do need to pay attention to your flash sync speed. On most cameras, this is easy to find with a Google search or a look at the shutter speed dial. The sync speed is the fastest shutter speed that your camera can handle without running into issues where the flash goes off too early or too late. So, while we're using the flash, all our shutter speed is doing is controlling the ambient exposure, the light that's all around us, the light coming from the sky, etc. It doesn't necessarily affect the flash, while changing the aperture will act more like we expect it to on this. Now, that is a seriously powerful thing to understand. Once you've got some practice, it becomes second nature to just balance your shutter speed and aperture to dial in the amount of contrast you want, from super high key, I definitely used a flash here, to just very gently filling in the shadows. Now, there's actually one more way to control the brightness of your flash, and it's one of the most powerful concepts in photography, but it does hurt your brain a little bit at first. It sounds really obvious, but where you put the flash is super important. But that's a little bit more complicated than it might seem. This is the part where a lot of people will start teaching about the inverse square law, but I don't think that's a particularly fun or useful way to understand what's going on here. Instead, what you need to know is this. The flash is shooting out light. And the further away the flash is from the thing it's pointed at, the less bright it is, right? But that less bright isn't linear. If you move the flash twice as far away, you get 1/4 of the brightness, not 1/2. You and I, luckily, don't need to know the science behind this, but it is important to have that concept at least a little bit in the back of your mind while you try this out. With a little bit of practice, you'll get a really good feel for how far away the flash should be to give sort of the right amount of light. You don't need to go and get a tape measure out for this. Trust your camera to handle any tiny differences in where the flash is or a half stop of overexposure. You don't have to get this perfect. But that's not the only way you can change where the flash is. If you have a bendy boy like me, or you're using off-camera flash, Bruce Gilden style, where the flash is pointed obviously has quite a big effect on how everything looks. This is especially important, I think, with faces. Okay, so let's take a theory break for a moment, and I'll show you how I'd achieve a few different looks, and then I'll briefly go over using an old school flash and film. I think a really cool and trendy look at the moment is this sort of 90s hard flash, Thrasher mag, disposable camera look. Lucky for you, it's pretty easy and straightforward, so let's start with that. There's two key parts to getting this aesthetic right. You guessed it, the flash and the ambient light. If you look up 90s flash photos on Pinterest, you'll notice that most of the time the background is pretty dark, and when you think about it, it makes sense. This aesthetic comes from people using the flash on their cameras out of necessity, not stylistic choice. So, we know we want a dark background and a very bright flash, but we also want the flash to be quite harsh. And the way we get that look is by removing any diffusion from the flash and pointing it straight at the subject's face. On-camera flash is best for this, since that's pretty close to what disposable cameras actually had. We don't want much angle to the light. After that, it's just a matter of cranking our shutter speed up to cut down the ambient light and balancing our flash power and aperture until we've got the subject nice and bright. But hold on, Hunter, what ISO do I use? Well, ISO will affect both the ambient and flash light, so keep that in mind and experiment. For this look, we want the ISO fairly low so that we can let the flash do most of the work of lighting the scene, but as usual, the best way to figure out what you want is to experiment. Now, your flash might not be as powerful as mine, so you might find that you need to boost your ISO a little more to get the range and output that you want. Or you might have a much more powerful flash than me, in which case, shoot everything at 100. Or don't. You can really ice the cake of the 90s look in post by smoothing off the highlights in a filmy kind of way, adding some grain, and even by pushing a little bit of green into the shadows, just like underexposed color film does. Easy, right? But what if we don't want that harsh disposable look, and instead we're indoors at night and we just want to use the flash to brighten up the image a bit so that we can get a nicely lit photo without it looking flashed? It sounds tricky and counterintuitive to get a not flash look by using flash, but it's really quite simple. Aim your flash at the ceiling and bounce the light off. You'll probably need to turn the flash power or your ISO up a little, but this is a super easy way to basically turn the whole ceiling into a giant soft light. It's a great way to get that really soft, natural look without needing a giant softbox. There are so many ways that you can get creative using a flash. I sometimes like to put the flash in the frame, so it's like a character in the picture. Or sometimes I like to spin the camera around while I'm taking the picture and get this very sort of heavily stylized, blurry look. The real key to getting great results with flash is just to trust it to work and experiment with it. Don't obsess over making sure all the settings are perfect because it's more forgiving than you think. And after enough time and practice, it will become more intuitive and feel-based for you instead of working stuff out on a calculator. Kind of like driving and cooking, you just develop a mental artistic muscle memory for it. Of course, that's a bit tricky if you're shooting film, since experimenting and making mistakes can be quite expensive. But luckily, there is a very straightforward way. A lot of people will explain that if you want to shoot flash on film, you need a light meter, or worse, a digital camera as well, so that you can use that to check your exposure. That's not true, and I remember being really frustrated when I was a film-only photographer by not having that gear available. There is, of course, a way to get the results you want without any of that stuff, but you're gonna need to hold on to your hat for a moment and trust me that it's simpler than it sounds. Guide number. Every flash has one, but for some unknown reason, basically no one prints it on the flash, but it's pretty simple to Google. The guide number basically tells you how powerful the flash is at full power. So, if you have an old flash, like for example my Vivitar, 99p at thrift store, by the way, you don't need to panic. Let me explain, and yes, my Vivitar is stuck in another country right now. This old flash has a guide number of 48, for example. You can use the guide number along with the distance you would like to be at to work out the correct aperture. If you want to shoot at a specific aperture, you can work out the distance away you'll need to be. As you might have guessed, there is a mathematical formula for working all of this out with the guide number, but that's no fun, and you only really need to learn that for nerd points, so I've linked a calculator I found in the video description. I know that all sounds ridiculous and complex, like why would you need a calculator to take pictures? That's horrid, but all you really need to do is memorize the most common situation you're going to be in. Like for example, the Vivitar at f8 using ISO 400 film will properly expose the subject at 12 feet. Right? Stay with me. Once you know that, you can just add or subtract stops using your aperture or distance, or convert for a different ISO film. Yes, I know you're yelling at the screen telling me that that's insane. The truth is you really only need to shoot a couple of rolls while like sweating and checking your notes app all the time until this starts to just kind of make sense somehow. It honestly just does click in your head, and you'll realize that actually you can mess up quite a lot with flash on film before it becomes a problem, because both are quite forgiving. It will just become something you can do instinctually. Trust me. That is really the key to all of this, trusting the process. Even if you do mess it up, who cares? You're learning, and failure is one of the most fun parts of learning because it means that you're pushing your boundaries and learning more than what you know. You're growing. I hope you give flash photography a go. If you do, you should post some on Instagram and tag me, or you can share it in the Discord. Merry Christmas, Wesołych Świąt, and as always, stay hydrated and create art.